Yes, good morning.
All right, lovely. Good morning and good afternoon from the East Coast. As folks kind of join us, I guess we'll just start off. We're going to be talking today about what's been a long and extremely high-profile trial. It was live streamed. The internet sort of turned into the ultimate peanut gallery. But at the same time, this is a very personal relationship that was really cracked wide open, and I think naturally folks have a lot of opinions, and makes it a little bit, different than a kind of defamation trial that's, political, or someone printed something in a newspaper, about my political views or something like that. All that said, what we do here at Sidebar and at Courthouse News is really focus on the law, the defamation statutes in this case that are in play as the jury deliberates in Fairfax County, Virginia. So to that end, today we're chatting with a defamation expert who has been following this case even in the years leading up to it, because it started well before this April, the whole saga. Raees Mohamed is an attorney at R.M. Warner Law in Scottsdale, Arizona. He was also a featured guest on our podcast at the beginning of the trial, explaining sort of the legal and cultural context. So make sure you check that out. We're Sidebar, a podcast from Courthouse News, and available, as they say, wherever you get your podcasts. Raees, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me, Nina. Pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So I guess we'll start a little bit broad. I'd love to just hear your overall take on the trial. We chatted at the beginning, and now it's the end. And kind of specifically, what was the most compelling argument in your view on each side over these past few weeks?
Yeah, I mean, first I should start by saying, we predicted at my firm that this would be the trial of the decade. And I think that holds true now that we've seen this all unfold. I mean, what a cartoon show, what an amazing trial for trial lawyers, and just what an amazing display of vitriol and hate, right? So compelling arguments. I mean, I kind of would like to frame this as more of sort of the evidence that was argued. But I think Johnny's side did a very good job of arguing that, listen, he has not said anything false, that the evidence, so-called evidence, and that the op-ed that Amber published was in fact false. He's not a wife beater. He did not commit domestic violence. And the way they argued the evidence, I think, was extremely compelling. I mean, we saw this for 6 weeks, that they poked holes in nearly every piece of evidence. They had a way to explain every piece of evidence that Amber Heard's side presented. So I thought they did a very compelling job in terms of just rebutting the allegation. And also, it's kind of interesting the way the claims and counterclaims work, because they're both suing for defamation. And so by proving that he is not a wife beater, in some respects, he's sort of also done two things. He's won his defense, but also proved his counterclaim. And so I think on the flip side, if I was to try to articulate, what Amber Heard's side's arguments were very compelling. I mean, they had a series of recordings and texts that we all got to hear and see. And I think they painted Johnny as sort of a deranged guy. And I thought they did a good job of arguing those points. And that, listen, before you believe, Captain Jack, look at how crazy he can be, right? The guy's painting with a severed finger. He's writing these notes with a bloody finger. Right, he's acting violently, or at least that's what we think on these recordings. And in these text messages, he's saying some very, very ugly things. So I think they argued that this guy's capable, and that he knew, and that he was kind of engaging in this campaign to destroy Amber. I think they did probably as best as they could with the evidence that they had.
Right. Yeah, there was definitely, I think you started off kind of vitriol, definitely no shortage of the really strong statements, really emotional reactions. And now we are, of course, onto jury deliberations, and hard to say, of course, how long they'll be out, and what exactly they may be talking about, what, of course, they may have inadvertently seen. I think if any of them logged onto Twitter or any other social media for the past few weeks, that was a big risk. But talk a little bit about what they have to prove as they deliberate the specifics? I think you mentioned a little bit, but what can and can't they consider in all of that evidence? Or rather, what's their charge? I suppose. What are they actually making a decision on?
Yeah, it's a good question, because it's very easy to lose sight of what the jury has to decide, right? And so the jury needs to decide that the elements of each party's case in chief, the claims as part of their case in chief, are provable. And so you have the elements of defamation. There's a false statement that was published. It is about that person. It is about the plaintiff. That it was made without some sort of privilege, meaning it wasn't an opinion, it wasn't free speech, it wasn't something that was said in a complaint that was filed in a lawsuit, and that it actually impacted the person's reputation and caused harm. And each one of these elements, there's a lot of facts here. It's very difficult. If I'm on this jury, I'm having a very difficult time meeting all these prongs. Even something as what we would think is simple as causation, that these statements actually caused the damages, actually caused Johnny to lose a role, or actually caused Amber to lose a role. So that's important. The other thing to keep in mind is, some of you may have heard this, but the standard at which this needs to be proven is not simple negligence like it would be in any other tort or in a standard defamation claim against by private parties, because these are celebrities on both sides. So you're a public figure, and as a public figure, if you're going to try to prove that you injured my reputation, the burden of proof goes up. So it's no longer, by a simple preponderance, meaning a 51% likelihood that occurred, but it's actually a clear and convincing standard, and it's malice. And I'll just note, we actually did a TikTok on this, poking fun of Amber Heard's lawyer, because in her closing arguments, she actually misstated the standard. Clear and convincing evidence of malice. Malice means knowledge of falsity or reckless disregard for the truth. It doesn't mean that you had an intent to harm. It's not malice like you would normally hear us use in the lay terminology, right? What we call common law malice, that you intended to harm me, you were malicious, quote unquote. So that's very, very important. So the jury has to make a determination that either or both Amber Heard and or Johnny Depp's statements about the other person were made with knowledge that they were false, or they were extremely, what we call, reckless. They had reckless disregard for the truth of what they were saying.
Right. Yeah. As you pointed out, so different from the show and that the trial has been. I think it was the cold open on Saturday Night Live a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
It just absolutely everywhere. So yeah, of course, a lot of really bizarre moments come with that. You mentioned the bloody finger painting. There was the witness who was vaping while testifying remotely. That would turned a lot of heads. The fans who brought alpacas to court. So I guess in all of this spectacle, the trial itself, I'm curious if any, not just sort of standout moments and these sort of details, but whether anything came as a surprise to you, evidence, witnesses, ruling, anything specifically as a defamation attorney and for a defamation trial. Was there anything that just kind of struck you?
Oh, there were so many shocking moments in this trial. And, this kind of reveals the uncertainty of trials. This is why so many defamation cases don't go to trial, frankly. In the civil side, somewhere between 1% to 10% of cases go to trial. And you're seeing, other than costs, you're seeing one of the reasons why, because there's a lot of uncertainty. So, there were quite a few standout moments. We had Morgan Tremaine. You guys may remember, the former TMZ employee, and this whole 15 minutes of fame, right? So he's brought over many objections to discuss sort of the origins of this video, who it came from, the video that Johnny Depp's side says, Amber Heard leaked, and it made her look sort of in the more favorable light and made Johnny look like an abuser. And this guy straight up tells the jury and everybody listening and on millions of people watching this that, listen, Amber Heard's lawyer. I'm not here for my 15 minutes of fame as much as you're here for your 15 minutes of fame. And you could literally see jaws drop in the courtroom. And I think it's a great point because in that moment, the way he said it and the way he was answering questions, normally I mean, if that's your witness, you encourage them not to answer questions like that. But I thought it was actually well played. So I thought that was a standout moment. I have to really compliment Camille Vasquez on her cross-examination of Amber. She really destroyed whatever credibility Amber had by the time she was cross-examined on, just asking her, so this witness for Johnny is a liar. That's what you're saying, that this person perjured themselves for Johnny. And of course, Amber's response is, yeah, I've seen this before. This guy's a very powerful man. He's the cabal of Hollywood. People get up here and will lie for him. They'll cheat for him. And so she really did a good job, I thought. Everybody should rewatch that cross-examination. It was marvelous. I thought Mr. Chen's closing statements, he made a few statements about this is Me Too without a Me Too. And that caught my ear, being an attorney who represents plaintiffs who are in that bucket and on the rare occasion defend people in that bucket on the civil side. But that's a powerful statement for the jury to hear. We all know what Me Too is. We all know, what it's like to now be accused of that falsely, at least allegedly falsely. I thought another standout moment. I'm sorry, I'm just going down my list of what's on the top of my head, so feel free to stop me.
No, that's all right.
But
go right ahead.
Yeah, I thought Rocky Pennington, Amber Heard's best friend or former best friend, she failed to corroborate Amber's testimony of what happened in Hicksville in Joshua Tree, California, about this alleged violent outbreak that Johnny Depp had. And she did not corroborate, in fact, what Amber Heard's story was. And then you had the manager who was a surprise, the surprise witness. Nobody expected this guy to pop out of the woodwork and actually testify at trial. I mean, there's stuff happening so fast, from one day to the next. But I think his name was Morgan Knight. He showed up to testify as a surprise rebuttal witness that, hey, listen, I'm the manager of this place that you and Johnny stayed at, and there was a light fixture that was busted for $50 or $60, right? This was not the quote unquote trashing the room that Amber identified. And you could see Amber, again, on cross-examination by Camille Vasquez, really struggle to kind of explain. She didn't get it in because Camille wouldn't allow her. She's like, listen, he did not corroborate a trashing the room, right? Just yes or no. Did he corroborate your story? Yes or no? And she tried to say, well, I don't know if he saw the closet. He wasn't there. But the jury's listening to this. The jury doesn't know this guy. The jury's just hearing him say, look, I'm the manager. I was there. Yes, there was damage. It was $50. It was a light fixture. It could have fallen off the table as far as we know. So I thought that was a really powerful standout moment. And then I think a lot of people who, don't do independent research, which again, juries are not supposed to do, but people who don't do independent research on Johnny Depp's life got a chance to really hear his childhood trauma. So his lawyers really did a very nice job of painting the picture of, look, guys, Johnny Depp is acknowledging that he's not a perfect human being. He has a lot of problems. He does drugs. He was in abusive relationships. He was a neglected child or came from an abusive home. And that impacts, and that jury can relate to that, right? So I thought those moments of Johnny testifying directly on his childhood trauma were also standout moments. Again, there's so many, but I thought these were a few notables.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, I think that's a great rundown of, again, something that had so much. It was streaming every day. I know people who kind of had it open on the side while they were working, but I think it really just, so many folks are paying attention. So that's a great breakdown of a lot of those moments. And I just will quickly say to those who are new joining us, my name is Nina Polano. I'm one of the co-hosts of Sidebar, which is a podcast from Courthouse News. You can find us on Twitter. The host of this Spaces is Courthouse News, and we are at Sidebar CNS. And with me today is Raees Mohamed, who comes from RM Warner Law in Scottsdale, Arizona. He's a defamation attorney who has really extensive knowledge on this case, and we're grateful that he can chat with us today. Speaking of which, and you just talked about some of those standout moments, but for you as an attorney, and I guess if you were on either side of this, because there were, of course, counterclaims, anything that you may have done differently, any kind of missed opportunities or arguments you would have tried to get in there?
Yeah, again, and this is easy. You know, every attorney that's listening to this is going to agree with me. It's very easy to play, you know, the backseat driver and the commentator, right, watching the live game. But
sure.
I think that Amber Heard's lawyers, and they got beat up pretty bad in the public eye and social media. But I have to say, when millions of people are watching you, you've got the pressure of a high profile piece of litigation, you're bound to make mistakes and slip ups, right? But on the whole, I think Amber Heard's lawyers should have presented more evidence and should have solicited more testimony on direct examination of her and their own witnesses that would make Amber Heard more credible, more believable. And I'll give you an example of what Johnny Depp's side did very well. Johnny, you did coke. You drank a lot. You were stressed. I mean, now you get into the head of a guy who's a super megastar celebrity. You listen to the hours they work, the travel, what it's like to be a father in Hollywood, what it was like to have this traumatic history. And it's like, you know what? As crappy as that is, I can kind of understand it, right? Versus I'm just this outrageous guy who likes to abuse my wife for no good reason, and I'm a vindictive person. I think Amber Heard's counsel should have done a better job of telling her story to garner credit. I'm specifically talking about like credibility, right? Which the jury decides who's telling the truth, which is critical in defamation, especially. But I think they could have done a better job. And so if I was representing Amber Heard, that, and I think she stared at the jury way too much. I think, yeah, like if I'm on the jury and Amber Heard's looking at me, shaking her head, and I'm actually uncomfortable, right? I think and every trial lawyer says something slightly different. Yeah, you're talking to the jury, but I think she was way too literal in that. And I think she struggled with that.
Yeah, it was interesting. And I talked with some other reporters about kind of watching two people who are actors for a living and what it's like on the stand and kind of their, you know, dramatic choices. I'm not sure you could ever kind of put that aside when you're, you know, choosing your posture and your demeanor and all of that. Just for a moment, I think it's important to talk about the context of this trial and setting aside kind of the trial itself and the evidence. As you mentioned, Johnny Depp's attorney, Ben Chu, made the argument that no woman before or after Amber Heard had made allegations against Johnny Depp. He called it Me Too without any Me Too. Mm-hmm. And of course, we know that, you know, not having dozens of people in a Harvey Weinstein situation come out against you doesn't necessarily mean anything, doesn't necessarily take away from something happening to one person. We do explore that, again, just a plug for the podcast. We talk about some of the issues, you know, how the public reacts to accusations, the idea of an imperfect accuser, an imperfect victim who's someone who may have anger issues of their own, and why we tend to maybe doubt stories if you know, folks, and again, I'm speaking outside of the context of the trial itself, but yeah, why and how we react that way. And so I think taking it back to the legal context and given the context and given how the trial sort of exploded, I'm curious if you see this affecting the way defamation law is used in these situations in the future. Is this, you know, is this a blow to people who may have considered this path on either side? And you know, suits have been filed both ways by accusers and by the accused.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I would say this. I think these kinds of trials always have two types of impacts that are really the opposite of one another. On one hand, people who feel like they have been defamed, whether correct or not, feel like, you know what, I need to seek justice for what happened to me too, right? And this is wrong. The public is seeing how wrong it is to ruin somebody's reputation, cause people and businesses to distance themselves. So I feel like I need to be vindicated, and you know, I want to hire a defamation lawyer. On the other hand of the spectrum, the opposite side, it's you know what? You got to be very, very careful if you're going to, think twice before you sue for defamation, because this is what I always tell my clients, and that is there's a Streisand effect. I mean, look at how bad both of them look. You can't unwind that. There's a chance that people will want to distance themselves from both of these celebrities just based on the evidence that came out. People who are not trying to make the decision of who's right and who's wrong. So I think in terms of the overall effect, yeah, it makes defamation sexy and interesting, but it also makes defamation very scary, because you can see how this plays out at trial. You also know that people are going to kind of get the unearthed version of your life with all the worms and dead bodies, right? So sure. I think that's a major impact of this trial.
Yeah, thanks for that. And of course, this is the second trial about really similar and maybe taking a defamation approach differently than the first trial Johnny Depp had against The Sun in the UK. But we chatted about this before the trial started, so I'm curious now with it behind us. How did this differ from the London trial? I know definitely that previous trial came up during testimony, during arguments. So how do those two things kind of comport, and anything that surprised you about the way it was used in this proceeding, I guess?
Yeah, the UK trial I wasn't a huge fan of, because I felt like the judge played way too many gatekeeper positions too tightly. So meaning there was a lot of evidence that did not get in that I think should have gotten in. And therefore, I don't think it was the complete picture. Versus in this trial, I think the judge did a very good job of really only excluding evidence that she thought needed to be excluded and that the jury shouldn't consider. And it's tough when you're making these evidentiary rulings on the fly like this. So I thought that the UK trial, the London trial was 16 days. This was 6 weeks. So the number of witnesses that were testifying, way, way, way more. And I think you got a better picture of the abuse allegations and whether they're true and not true and how they could have been proven or disproven versus what happened in London. And as everybody knows, Johnny lost that lawsuit against the Sun because the judge believed that the allegations of abuse were substantially true. Well, yeah, if you're limiting a lot of the rebuttal witnesses and other evidence against Amber Heard, then you could surmise that conclusion from the evidence, perhaps. So I thought that was a significant gap between what's happening here versus what happened in London.
Great. Yeah, thanks. So we're getting down to the couple minutes. So I have a final question, but before I do that, is there anything that you wanted to add that sort of stood out we haven't talked about yet?
I would just say that really two things. It's very easy. I kind of mentioned this earlier. It's very easy to criticize the lawyers and the angles, but there's so much pretrial work that happens. We're seeing just a snippet. Again, 10%, 1% to 10% of cases ever make it to this phase. There's so many emotions. There's so many things going on. I mean, you heard a little bit about the metadata and images being doctored and altered, and there's redactions, and there's a whole sideshow that happened that the jury never got to hear and should not hear, and that we watching a trial would never hear. So that stuff impacts the outcome at trial, right? So both sides really have to fight. There's a lot going on, and I don't think we should marginalize either side for the amount of work and prep it takes to get to this point. That's one thing I would say, because it's very easy on social media to watch these memes. You guys should watch some of ours. I think we have a few funny ones on TikTok. But it's very easy to memeify this trial, but I just want to underscore the fact that this is litigation, and it's very difficult, and it's very complicated, and there's a lot going on. I think the second thing I would say is, it's very hard, very, very, very hard to ignore what happens outside of evidence in trial, meaning what's on social media, who Captain Jack Sparrow is and who Amber is or isn't, and let that sort of taint your mind as a juror. And that's one of the reasons why the judge kept saying, you're not to do any outside research. You're not to talk to each other. You're not to talk to anyone. I mean, these jurors just came off a long weekend. You know how difficult it is to bite your fingernails and not look online or not talk to people and say, right? They're not supposed to do that. Sure. Yeah, they're not supposed to, because you're supposed to just make a ruling. So it's a very imperfect world. that we live in this jury trial, especially. So I would just say that these jurors have a very, very difficult time. I don't think they're going to come to a decision today. And if we're lucky, we'll get a decision tomorrow, maybe. So that's the only other thing I would add.
Great, thanks. And yeah, as you mentioned, all of that work leading up to trial, I'll just point folks who are listening, if you're interested in that background, we have a reporter, Joan Hennessy, who's there in Virginia and has really been covering this case, all of those motions, all of that nitty gritty, whether Amber Heard's arrest records could be allowed, whether she could use anti-SLAPP defense. So, I mean, I think, it's a fascinating case. I think that's sort of agreed. So if you want that background, courthousenews.com is the place for that. One last question, and you've hinted at this a little bit with your takes and just now about deliberations, but any prediction as to the outcome of either side and or a dollar amount?
Yeah. I knew you were going to ask this question, and I had no idea how I was going to answer it.
Have to do it.
Yeah. What I would say is I think Amber Heard's lawyers made a very big mistake at the end when they said, yeah, we're not really suing for $100 million, but we're suing for what's fair. Mm-hmm. What a mistake that was. Because now you look like this was all a charade, right? Like it just looks completely horrible. So I think there's a good likelihood Johnny wins his defense and his actual affirmative claim, and that the jury awards him damages. I don't think I think there's evidence that Amber may have been abused in some way, but I don't think she's going to get damages because I don't think their experts put on a good damages calculation or comparable. So to the extent that she wins, I don't think she's going to get money. I think Johnny has a greater likelihood of prevailing on his claims and his defense, and he may get damages in the range of 7 to 10 million. Don't ask me how I came up with that. I just literally ballparked. But I think he wins his defense for sure.
Great. Well, we won't hold you to that. I appreciate you taking the plunge because, of course, jury trials are weird and we never really know what's going to happen. But I think that's a good place to leave it. Raees, thank you so much. You can find him on TikTok and Instagram at RM Warner Law. We are Sidebar, a podcast from Courthouse News. You can tap in the attendees. Either of our accounts, follow us, stick around, and we'll have more legal podcasts on wherever you find your podcasts, Spotify, Apple, etc. I think that's all we have. Thanks again, Raees.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks, Nina.